The conference room buzzed with nervous energy as executives shifted in their seats, waiting for my presentation to begin. I glanced down at my phone vibrating quietly on the table, Richard's name flashing across the screen. I excused myself with a polite smile and stepped into the hallway, expecting his usual check-in about dinner plans or perhaps asking when I'd be home. Instead, what I heard made my blood run cold. "I'm divorcing you," Richard said, his voice unervingly casual, as if he were commenting on the weather. "And I've already sold the house. You have 3 days to get your stuff out before the new owners move in." My grip tightened around the phone as I struggled to process his words. What are you talking about?" Richard laughed, a sound that once brought me comfort but now felt like a slap across my face. "Don't act surprised, Sarah. Our marriage has been dead for years. I'm just making it official." "You sold our house?" I managed to ask, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You can't do that without my signature." "Actually, I can," he replied with smug satisfaction. "Remember those papers you signed last month? The ones for our investment property? You didn't even read them, did you? You just trusted me, like always." The hallway seemed to tilt beneath my feet. The realization that my husband of 8 years had tricked me, had manipulated me into signing away our home, hit me like a physical blow. But beneath the shock, something else was stirring, a slow-burning anger that I'd suppressed for far too long. "I'll see you in court," I said, my voice calmer than I felt, and ended the call before he could respond. I stood there, phone clutched in my hand, as reality settled around me. My husband had betrayed me in the most devastating way possible, and he'd laughed about it. 8 years of marriage, thrown away with a chuckle and a threat to make me homeless. Taking a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and returned to the conference room. 20 pairs of eyes turned to me expectantly as I took my place at the head of the table. No one would have guessed that my life had just imploded moments ago. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, my voice steady and professional. "Let's talk about securing your financial future," I began, the irony not lost on me. "My name is Sarah Chin, and until that phone call, I thought I understood what my life was. I was a successful financial advisor at one of Boston's top firms, happily married to Richard, a real estate developer with a charming smile and ambitious dreams. We'd built a life together, a beautiful home in a quiet suburb, weekend trips to the coast, dinner parties with friends. Or at least, that's what I'd believed. The rest of the workday passed in a blur. I moved through my meetings on autopilot, nodding at the right moments, offering advice with practiced ease, while my mind raced with questions and calculations. How long had Richard been planning this? What else had he lied about? Where would I go in 3 days? As I drove home that evening, the setting sun casting long shadows across the familiar streets of our neighborhood, I felt like I was seeing everything for the first time. The manicured lawns, the elegant facades, the life I thought was mine, it all seemed like an elaborate stage set now, ready to be dismantled. Our house, my house, stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch where we'd spent countless summer evenings. Richard's car wasn't in the driveway, which didn't surprise me. He was probably with her, whoever she was. There was always someone else with men like Richard. That much I'd learned from my clients, women who came to me after divorces left them financially devastated, seeking help to rebuild their lives from scratch. I wouldn't be one of those women. I couldn't afford to be. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. I moved from room to room, looking at our shared possessions with new eyes. The antique dining table we'd found at an estate sale in Vermont. The leather sofa Richard had insisted we needed. The photographs of us on the mantel, smiling on beaches and mountaintops, a visual timeline of what I now recognized as a carefully crafted illusion. In our home office, I started searching. Tax returns, property records, bank statements. I pulled everything I could find from the filing cabinet, spreading the documents across the desk. As a financial advisor, I'd helped countless clients untangle complex financial situations. Now I needed to apply that expertise to my own life, and quickly. Hours passed as I dug deeper into our financial history. What emerged was a pattern of deception so carefully constructed that I might never have discovered it if Richard hadn't become overconfident. Hidden accounts. Transfers to offshore banks. And most damning of all, a copy of the deed transfer he'd tricked me into signing, transferring our home solely into his name 6 months ago. My hands shook as I stared at my own signature on the document. How could I have been so blind? So trusting? The answer was simple and painful, because I'd loved him. Because I'd believed in our partnership. Because I'd never imagined he would betray me like this. My phone rang again, startling me. It wasn't Richard this time, but my oldest friend, Maya. "Hey, I'm in the neighborhood," she said when I answered. "Thought I'd stop by for a glass of wine?" I hesitated, not sure if I was ready to share what had happened. But the thought of facing this night alone was suddenly unbearable. "Please do," I replied, my voice catching slightly. "There's something I need to tell you." 20 minutes later, Maya sat across from me at the kitchen island, her face a mask of shock and fury as I recounted Richard's call and what I'd discovered since. "That absolute bastard," she said when I finished, her hand tightening around her wine glass. "He can't do this, Sarah. It's fraud." "It's worse than that," I said, pushing the deed transfer toward her. "I did sign this. I didn't read it carefully, just trusted him when he said it was for an investment property we were considering." "Stupid, I know." Maya shook her head firmly. "Not stupid. Human. You trusted your husband, which is what people are supposed to do in a marriage." She studied the document, frowning. "But this doesn't make sense. Even if he transferred the deed, he would need your signature to sell the house. You're still legally married." "I hadn't considered that." "You're right. So what's his game? Why tell me he's already sold it?" "To scare you," Maya said immediately. "To make you feel powerless so you'll accept whatever scraps he offers in the divorce." Classic bullying tactic. Maya wasn't just my friend, she was also one of the city's top divorce attorneys. I'd seen her in action at charity events, fierce and uncompromising in her defense of clients who'd been wronged by manipulative spouses. "I need your help," I said quietly. "Not as my friend, but as my lawyer." Maya nodded, her expression shifting from friend to professional in an instant. "You've got it. And the first thing we're going to do is find out if he's actually sold this house or if he's bluffing. Either way, he's in for a rude awakening." For the first time since Richard's call, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't alone in this fight, and more importantly, I wasn't powerless. "What do we do first?" I asked. Maya pulled out her phone. "First, we check the county records to see if any sale has been recorded. Then we contact our friend Judge Michaels for an emergency injunction if needed. And then," she smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes, "we prepare for war." The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Maya and I had stayed up late into the night, strategizing and preparing. County records showed no sale had been recorded yet, but Richard had listed the property with a real estate agent a week ago, without my knowledge or consent. "He's trying to force a quick sale," Maya had explained. Probably has a buyer lined up already and is rushing to close before you find out. Now, as I sat in Maya's office, surrounded by the trappings of legal power, law books, certificates, awards for cases won, I felt a strange sense of calm. The shock had worn off, replaced by a cold, clear determination. Maya's assistant brought in a stack of papers and placed them on the desk. "These are the emergency motions we're filing today," Maya explained. "A restraining order to prevent any sale of the property, a motion to freeze all your joint assets, and an initial divorce petition citing fraud and financial misconduct." I signed where indicated, my signature stronger and more deliberate than it had been on the document Richard had tricked me into signing. "What happens now?" I asked as Maya's assistant took the papers away. "Now we wait for Richard to be served," Maya said. "Should happen this afternoon. And then..." She smiled that predatory smile again. "Then we see how confident he is when he realizes who he's up against." I spent the rest of the day at Maya's office, making calls to secure temporary housing in case Richard's 3-day threat had any teeth to it, and working with Maya's financial investigator to track down all of our marital assets. By late afternoon, we had a preliminary list that raised more questions than it answered. "There's money missing," I said, frowning at the spreadsheet on my laptop. "Based on our income and known expenses over the past 5 years, there should be at least another $500,000 in these accounts." The financial investigator, a former IRS agent named Diane, nodded. "I noticed that too. I'll dig deeper, but my initial guess? Hidden accounts, possibly offshore. Not uncommon in high-conflict divorces where one spouse has been planning their exit for a while." The thought of Richard methodically planning this betrayal, perhaps for years, sent a fresh wave of anger through me. Not just at him, but at myself for not seeing the signs. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya, "Richard served with papers. Reaction not good. Calling now." Moments later, my phone rang. "You're on speaker with me and Diane," I said when I answered. "Our boy just got served," Maya said, sounding immensely satisfied. "I had Javier do it, you know, the big guy who used to play linebacker for the Patriots before he went to law school." Richard was at his office, apparently in the middle of a meeting with clients. Javier said his face turned about 3 shades of purple. I shouldn't have felt pleased at that image, but I did. "Has he responded yet?" "Oh yes. His lawyer called me about 20 minutes ago, blustering about how there's been a misunderstanding and we should all sit down like adults to discuss this." I informed him that the time for discussion was before his client committed fraud, not after. "Do you think they'll fight the restraining order?" I asked. "They can try," Maya replied, confidence evident in her voice. "But Judge Michaels has already signed it. Any attempt to sell that house now would be a direct violation of a court order. Richard might be arrogant, but I doubt his lawyer will let him risk jail time." After we hung up, I sat quietly for a moment, processing. A day ago, I'd felt like my life was crumbling around me. Now, I was fighting back, and it felt right. Like I was finally standing up for myself in a way I should have done long before now. My phone rang again, and this time it was Richard. I hesitated, then answered, putting it on speaker so Diane could witness whatever he said. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Richard demanded, his voice tight with anger. "Protecting what's mine," I replied calmly. "You should have expected that." "This is ridiculous, Sarah. You're overreacting. I was going to give you half the proceeds from the house sale. More than fair considering I paid for most of it." I laughed then, a short, sharp sound that surprised even me. "Is that the story you're telling now?" "That's not what the mortgage documents show," Richard. Or our tax returns. Or the records of my deposits into our joint account every month for the past 8 years. You've always been so obsessed with keeping score, he said dismissively. This is why our marriage fell apart. You and your spreadsheets and calculations. No, I said firmly. Our marriage fell apart because you lied. Because you manipulated me. Because you thought you could throw me away like garbage and take everything we built together. Listen, his voice shifted, becoming cajoling, we can work this out between us. No need for lawyers and courts. Come home tonight, we'll talk. The sudden change in tactics was so transparent it was almost laughable. I'll pass. And Richard? Don't try to sell the house. The emergency restraining order is already in effect. I ended the call before he could respond, feeling lighter than I had in months. Maybe years. Diane was watching me with a mixture of admiration and concern. You did well, she said. But be careful. When manipulators realize they can't control you anymore, they can become dangerous. I know, I nodded. That's why I'm not going back to the house tonight. That evening, I checked into a hotel suite Maya had arranged for me, one with excellent security and staff who were instructed not to confirm my presence to anyone. As I unpacked the small bag of essentials I'd brought from home, I realized how little I actually needed from that house. Clothes could be replaced. Possessions were just things. What mattered was my future, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about it. My phone had been buzzing periodically with texts from Richard, alternating between angry demands and pleading requests to talk. I ignored them all, following Maya's advice, document everything, respond to nothing. I ordered room service and settled in with my laptop, continuing to work through our financial records. With each hour of investigation, the picture became clearer. Richard had been systematically diverting funds from our joint accounts for over 2 years, moving money through a complex web of transfers that he probably thought were untraceable. He'd underestimated me, though. Financial forensics was part of my daily work, and I was good at it. By midnight, I had identified at least $800,000 that Richard had hidden away, presumably for his post-divorce life. I documented everything meticulously, sending copies to both Maya and Diane. This would be crucial ammunition in the divorce proceedings. Sleep came surprisingly easily that night. Perhaps because, for the first time since Richard's devastating call, I felt like I had regained some control over my life. The next morning brought a development I hadn't anticipated. As I was having coffee in the hotel restaurant, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Is this Sarah Chin? A woman's voice asked when I answered. Yes, who's this? My name is Eliza Porter. You don't know me, but I'm the woman Richard has been seeing. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. Why are you calling me? Because I think you should know the truth, Eliza said, her voice trembling slightly. Richard told me he was divorced. He said his ex-wife had taken him for everything in the settlement and that's why he needed to borrow money from me. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. How much did he take from you? Almost $200,000, she admitted, sounding embarrassed. My inheritance from my grandmother. He said he was investing it for us, for our future. But after he was served those papers yesterday, he changed. He became angry, desperate. He admitted he was still married and that he'd used my money for something else entirely. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Richard is very convincing when he wants to be. Yes, she agreed quietly. I'm calling because I want to help. If you're taking him to court, I have records of the transfers, texts where he promised to invest my money. I have proof. I thought quickly. Are you willing to sign an affidavit? To testify if needed? Yes, Eliza said firmly. He shouldn't get away with this. After getting her contact information and passing it to Maya, I sat back, processing this new development. Richard hadn't just betrayed me, he'd been running the same con on another woman simultaneously. The depth of his deception was staggering. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya, court hearing set for tomorrow morning. Judge Michael's courtroom. Be ready for fireworks. The next 24 hours passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Maya and I worked late into the night, organizing evidence, preparing statements, anticipating Richard's potential arguments. Diane had uncovered even more financial irregularities, including what appeared to be a cash purchase of a condo in Florida 3 months ago, exactly the type of hiding place for assets that divorcing spouses often used. By the time I walked into the courthouse the next morning, dressed in my most professional suit, I felt prepared for battle. Maya strode beside me, briefcase in hand, every inch the formidable attorney I knew her to be. Richard was already there, huddled with his lawyer in the hallway outside the courtroom. He looked up as we approached, his expression darkening. I noticed with satisfaction that he looked terrible, unshaven, circles under his eyes, his usually immaculate suit slightly rumpled. Sarah, he called out, taking a step toward me. Maya smoothly intercepted him. My client has nothing to say to you outside of these proceedings, Mr. Chen. Please direct all communication through me. His lawyer, a sleek man in an expensive suit, placed a restraining hand on Richard's arm. Let's keep this professional, he murmured. Inside the courtroom, Judge Michaels, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, called the hearing to order. Maya presented our case first, methodically laying out Richard's deception with the house deed, his attempt to sell our home without my knowledge, the hidden assets, and finally, Eliza Porter's affidavit. When she finished, Judge Michaels turned her penetrating gaze to Richard's lawyer. Counselor, I'm very interested to hear how you're going to explain this conduct. What followed was a masterclass in legal deflection. Richard's lawyer argued that the deed transfer had been a simple misunderstanding, that Richard had always intended to split the proceeds from any house sale fairly, that the Florida condo was an investment property for both of us. He painted Richard as a devoted husband who had perhaps made some administrative errors but meant no harm. Throughout his presentation, I watched Richard carefully. He kept his expression neutral, nodding occasionally at points his lawyer made, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in his hands. He knew he was losing. Judge Michaels allowed the arguments to continue for nearly an hour before raising her hand for silence. I've heard enough, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Mr. Chen's actions demonstrate a clear pattern of deception and financial misconduct. The restraining order on the property will remain in place. Additionally, I am freezing all assets identified in these proceedings pending a full accounting. Mr. Chen, the court takes a very dim view of attempts to hide marital assets. Very dim indeed. Richard's face paled as the judge continued, outlining further restrictions and requirements that effectively prevented him from accessing or moving any significant funds until our divorce was settled. As we left the courtroom, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. This wasn't over. The divorce proceedings could drag on for months, but the first, crucial battle had been won. Richard wouldn't be selling our house out from under me. He wouldn't be disappearing with our money. He would have to face the consequences of his actions. In the courthouse hallway, Richard tried one last time to approach me, his expression a mixture of anger and something that might have been fear. Sarah, this isn't necessary. We can still work this out. I looked at him calmly, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time in our marriage. No, Richard, we can't. You made your choice when you decided to betray me, to steal from me, to lie to me. Now you'll have to live with it. You'll regret this, he said, his voice lowering. Fighting me will cost you everything. I smiled then, a genuine smile that seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. That's where you're wrong. Fighting you has already given me back something invaluable, my self-respect. With that, I turned and walked away, Maya beside me, leaving Richard standing there with his increasingly worried-looking lawyer. The weeks that followed were not easy. Richard fought the divorce proceedings at every turn, delaying, objecting, trying to hide additional assets that Diane inevitably uncovered. His initial smugness had given way to desperation as he realized that his carefully constructed financial house of cards was collapsing. I returned to work, explaining to my concerned colleagues and sympathetic boss that I was going through a difficult divorce but was fully capable of handling my clients' needs. If anything, my personal experience had made me even more committed to helping my clients, particularly women, secure their financial futures. One unexpected bright spot during this challenging time was the friendship that developed between me and Eliza Porter. After her initial call, we'd met for coffee, two women united by their experience with the same manipulative man. Where I had expected to find awkwardness or resentment, instead I discovered a kindred spirit. Eliza was smart, warm, and as determined as I was to see Richard held accountable. I keep thinking about how many others there might be, she said during one of our coffee meetings. Women who trusted him, who he took advantage of. The thought had occurred to me as well. Maya's looking into it, I told her. If there's a pattern of this kind of behavior, especially if he's been taking money from multiple women, it could move from civil to criminal territory. 3 months into the divorce proceedings, we got a break. One of Richard's former business associates, facing his own legal troubles, decided to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for leniency in his case. What he revealed was stunning. Richard had been running what amounted to a small-scale Ponzi scheme, using money from new investors, primarily women he was romantically involved with, to pay returns to earlier investors while skimming substantial amounts for himself. When Maya presented this evidence to Richard's lawyer, along with the hint that law enforcement might be interested in these findings, everything changed. Suddenly, Richard was eager to settle. The terms Maya negotiated were comprehensive. I would keep our house, plus 70% of all marital assets once they were fully accounted for. Richard would be responsible for all legal fees. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue criminal charges, though we made no promises about what his other victims might do. On the day the divorce was finalized, I stood on the steps of the courthouse, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness for the end of a marriage I had once believed in. Anger at the years of deception. But primarily, a profound sense of relief and newfound strength. Maya hugged me as we prepared to go our separate ways. How does it feel to be officially free? She asked. I considered the question seriously. Like I've woken up from a long sleep, I finally answered. Like I can see clearly now. 6 months later, I stood in the entryway of my home, truly my home now, looking at the changes I'd made. Gone were Richard's dark leather furniture, the sterile minimalist decor he'd insisted on. In their place, comfortable chairs, colorful art, plants that filled the rooms with life. The house that had almost been stolen from me had been reclaimed and transformed. Just like I had. My phone rang, and I smiled at the caller ID. Maya, probably calling to remind me about the dinner party she was hosting that evening. I was just about to leave, I said when I answered. Good, Because I have someone I want you to meet, she replied, a hint of mischief in her voice. A new client who just moved to Boston. He's an architect, divorced 3 years ago, and unlike some men we know, actually a decent human being. I laughed, slipping on my coat. Maya, are you trying to set me up? Maybe, she admitted. But no pressure. Just conversation with someone who might understand what you've been through. As I locked my front door and headed to my car, I felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. Not because I was ready for a relationship, I wasn't sure when or if I'd be ready for that again, but because I was open to the possibility of new connections, new experiences. The future stretched before me, unwritten but full of promise. Richard's phone call a year ago had been intended to destroy me, to leave me homeless and broken. Instead, it had become the catalyst for my transformation. He had laughed then, confident in his power over me. But I was the one smiling now. I started my car and pulled away from the house that I had fought for and won, heading toward an evening of friendship and possibility. Richard had thought our story would end with his triumphant escape and my devastation. But that wasn't the ending at all. It was merely the beginning of my new chapter, one where I wrote the rules, controlled my destiny, and never again allowed anyone to make me doubt my worth. As the evening sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, I drove toward my future, stronger, wiser, and finally, completely free.